Hey.
All right, we're live. Hi, how are you?
We are live. Good, good. Great reminder to set my timer just so, I don't yep the whole time without having any, well, that is kind of my MO. So I could act like it's good to see you, but we have been chatting for the last few half hours. So, but welcome to the rest of the world, right? Thanks for joining us. We are on 3.
Yeah.
Is that for real? This is awesome. Okay, so Thelma, Louise here. We have decided to start a journey together to support each other and the larger community in raising our children bilingually. It is not a simple task. It is a complicated task, but we are dedicated to it. And today, in our 3rd episode, we're going to talk about another way to raise your children bilingually. So my name's Heather Robertson Devine. I'm the owner of Books Del Sur, and this is my co-host. I don't know, does that work?
Yeah, I'll be your co-host, co-pilot.
All right. I was just telling Krista earlier that I really wanted to be the wingman. So I'm not sure. Maybe, I don't know. Yeah. So this is Krista Jimenez, and she is of Pura Vida Moms, and I'll let you introduce yourself.
Yeah. So we're the co-founders of Bilingual We, and I'm Krista Jimenez, founder of Pura Vida Moms, a bilingual website aimed at helping parents raise their children bilingual, travel with their kids, cook bilingual foods, read bilingual books, all the fun things that you can find. And it's also the home of our Bilingual We community. So you can check out a awesome video on our YouTube channel that Heather made giving you a tour of how to access our community. So we are here to help you and help each other stay motivated to raise bilingual kids. You can find us on my website, www.puravidamoms.com. And there's a little button there that says Bilingual We. And it enters here, and every time you click that button, you enter straight up to our community and our latest posts and all the things that we're doing. We're also on YouTube at puravidamoms.com. At YouTube is our username. And we have all kinds of videos there of us talking about bilingualism, and I've also curated a whole bunch of great content for your kids. So you can follow along with some of the things that I'm using with my children to help reinforce bilingualism, so they're hearing lots of different voices. We also have our own hashtag BilingualWe, and you can use that on Instagram or Facebook or Twitter. You can search all kinds of great discussion that's happening. In fact, Usu Lorenz just shared with us an amazing article from The Economist about bilingual kids. So shout out to sharing that with us. He's our hashtagger of the week. And you too can join in our amazing conversations just by using that hashtag. Tag anything that has to do with your bilingual life. If that's pictures of what you're doing with your kids, if that's questions you have about the Spanish language, if that's strategies that you're using, articles you're reading, books that you're finding for your kids or for yourself, anything that has to do with bilingual parenting, we want to know about it. So that's, again, hashtag Bilingual We. And now, Heather, I think you're going to recap some of our nerdy terminology that we've talked about over the past 2 weeks.
So last week Krista shared about what her back. Do you hear that?
I don't hear it.
Okay, there we go. It's better. Krista shared about her household and what her household looks like, and both you and your husband, aren't you, both sequential bilinguals? Because in the opposite directions. So Krista's a sequential bilingual because she learned English first and then Spanish, and her husband's sequential bilingual because he learned Spanish first and then English. And for the most part, your daughters are simultaneous bilinguals, right?
Yes.
Yes. So that means that they're learning both languages at the same time, and we really can't pull apart, numbers another. It's all happening at the same time. And terms have come to both. Krista and I have education backgrounds. I'm having my last day of school tomorrow with my amazing 4th grade dual language classroom. It's my first year working in a dual language classroom, and so the term simultaneous bilingual for me is really, really apparent, and I'm learning so much from them because it's such a different experience than mine, because I also am a sequential bilingual, so learned English growing up and then Spanish through schooling and experiences. So, but I have to say, simultaneous bilingual is the way our kids are growing up, and that's the way most kids are doing it these days. Another term we talked about last week is minority language at home, and that using the language, the minority language, or the language that's not in power. And in the United States, the language of power is English. It's the dominant culture. It is commonly heard outside the home. And so when we use a minority language at home, that means any language other than English. And in both of our situations, we are Spanish speakers and English speakers. So that's really where most of our talk goes. Not to be elitist, we don't mean to be that at all. It's just those are our experiences.
Right. So I have a question for you about, and I wanted to ask you this last week, and then we kind of ran out of time. So this idea of sequential bilingualism and simultaneous bilingualism, right? I'm clearly a sequential bilingual because I didn't start learning Spanish until high school, junior high. But I'm curious because my older daughter was only exposed to Spanish, only for the first two and a half years of her life. And then when she started in preschool, her English just took off, right? In a matter of 6 months, she is speaking way more English than Spanish. And really her only input that she was getting, it was about 4 or 5 hours a week at preschool. But now I'm finding that she will come to me and say, how do you say this in Spanish? Because she feels like her English is stronger. So at 2.5, 3 years old, she feels like her English is stronger, even though her very first language really was like 90% Spanish. So is there a point when when simultaneous bilinguals is she always going to be, I'm trying to phrase this the right way, but is she always going to be a simultaneous bilingual because she's hearing something at school and something at home? And so, or is that language of power going to overtake her minority language, which right now is Spanish? And then is there ever a point where simultaneous bilinguals become sequential bilinguals, I guess is the question. I don't know if that makes sense what I'm asking, but it seems like there's kind of a dovetail in there.
Yeah, I'm well, let's see if you like my response. And then you can tell me if that's what you're asking or not.
Perfect.
In the United States, raising children in the United States, because English is the language of power and it's so dominant and it's so unavoidable, right? Like you're saying that you're exposed your oldest to Spanish in the household the whole time, and you would say, 90% Spanish. Because English is so dominating and exposed to it, it's hard for our kids to be sequential bilinguals first, then English second. Even if both parents are native speakers and both parents barely even speak the other language, it's still because of just going to the grocery store, because of like simple tasks like that, they are sequential bilinguals. You were asking the question if it seems like you're asking the question, does one take over the other? And in the term sequential or simultaneous bilingual, there's no measurement of more or less. The research now talks about calls, I might get this name wrong, but Kathy Escamilla is not, I know that for sure. Kathy Escamilla uses the term. She's a huge bilingual researcher, amazing work. And actually we should congratulate her because she just got named chair of the education school in Boulder, University of Colorado, Boulder.
Well, that's my neighborhood.
I know, it's your people. Amazing honor for anyone, but also a female Latina. It's huge. So congratulations to Kathy. Incredibly well deserved. Her research is primary in the United States around our bilingual kids. She is one of them that identified simultaneous bilingual. Mm-hmm. But my point was, she calls students bilinguals, which I actually am not a fan of, and I challenge people who use it, because it's already putting a judgment on it, right? And at what point do you judge, like, in our conversation next week about situational bilingual, we'll talk about this a little bit more in detail, but the quantities and how much is enough. And I mean, if you look at you and I, we've already talked about we're overachievers. It's never enough. So, so measuring things and pulling apart things to be able to measure them, it's so tricky to do. And it's really task. So when we say simultaneous bilingual, there's no quantity attached to it. There's no 50%, 100%, or anything like that attached to it. It's just both are.
Yeah.
And let's be really zen about it. They are.
Well, and I think the huge part about bilingualism for me too is that I didn't really realize is that my brain is wired in a way that I learned a second language and it was easy for me, but I'm actually hardwiring my daughter's brains in a different way by introducing them to 2 languages from the womb, right? Because I was teaching native Spanish speakers while they were in my belly, speaking Spanish all day in the classroom, but with my colleagues speaking English, and coming home and speaking Spanish to my husband and speaking English to my parents, and, back and forth. So they already, from the womb, had this concept of 2 languages, which I didn't have. So I guess they really probably are simultaneous bilinguals, even though right now my older daughter is choosing to produce more in English. If I say to her, hey, habla en español, she switches. There's not really an issue. Yeah, but it just, as a parent, you're always reflecting on, is it enough? Are they going to do it? Is it, on all the things you can't control.
Right. So something that's really incredible. Your daughter's 3?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's incredibly, it's incredible that she's already identified the 2 languages and she knows when what is what. That's usually something that in kindergarten and in first grade we're still developing. So
wow. Okay.
To you, like, for being explicit about that, because it's something that it's developmentally she's ahead of the game.
Well, that's interesting because that just came up about 8 weeks ago. Where we were starting to learn to read in Spanish, and she wanted to know which books were in Spanish and which were in English. So we talked about accents, and if there's this little thing over the letter, then that's a book in Spanish, because it really came up as, why can't Grandma and Grandpa read me all my books? Because she would take in Spanish books to them and say, they'd say, I don't know what this is. Or they were so sweet, they'd try to read it. And Liana would be like, that's not what that says, Grandma. That's not how you pronounce it. And so that just came up as this idea of, so-and-so speaks English, so-and-so speaks Spanish. So thank you for the props today, because I've been a little hard on myself and on her, because I'm like, she's not speaking enough Spanish. But you're right. She understands which is which and what's an appropriate place to use them. I mean, I know adults who don't know that. So, all right. I'm going to be zen, like you said.
Yep.
So I guess we're a little bit off topic for today, but I love that organic discussion. You're so well versed in what's happening in the research of bilingualism. I value that so much, because I feel like sometimes I'm just not up on the research. I'm just trying to do it and see what comes out.
Well, I have been very fortunate to work with some amazing people that keep me in the loop on research. So, I feel very lucky about that.
Yeah. Well, you know your stuff, girl. So I think I'll keep you around for another few episodes.
All right. So today's topic is one parent, one language strategy. So Krista, can you give us an overview of what that is?
Yep. So we're continuing on with our series of just creating this bilingual community of the bilingual looks a whole bunch of different ways, and there's all kinds of ways to achieve it. And there's all kinds of different amounts of bilingual that someone can be. In this case, we're talking about one parent, one language, which is generally when if there are 2 parents, native language, so 2 sequential bilinguals whose native language is different, which actually my husband and I would be a perfect example for this, right? So his native language is Spanish, mine is English. So I would only speak English to the children, and he would only speak Spanish to the children. One parent, one language. And so you'll often find this is really common when you have a partnership of 2 spouses who Geez, girl, you really got that microphone going.
Yeah.
All right. I'm like, what's going on?
It's the feedback that was really bugging me. So
no worries. I was hearing dum, dum.
Sound.
All right. I know. It's a musician in me. All right. So when you've got two parents who are not bilingual, but they want their children to be bilingual. So each parent speaks their language. And the children end up getting both. So the children would be simultaneous bilinguals, and the parents may be sequential bilinguals, but they may not be. So that's essentially what one parent, one language is. Each parent speaks their native language to the kids.
So my fancy term for this is the European way, because
that's the European way.
European way, because actually the families that I know who use this are European, because there are so many languages in Europe, right? And so that's where I often associate it is like the European way, because mom's Hungarian, dad's Italian, the language is associated. I think this is really an interesting approach, because honestly, for me, this is how I approach language as well. If I know someone's a native Spanish speaker, much easier for me to speak to them in Spanish.
Mm-hmm.
But like, I'm gonna be honest, Krista, with you, like it feels a little contrived speaking Spanish with you, and it's not because anything about you. It's not about you. It's about me, because of, and it's my eternal associations and my biases working together, right? And so I think that this approach is so fascinating, because as a young child, they immediately adapt the person, and that person is when their code switching occurs. So like, I don't know, if I could study the brain patterns of children in households, it'd be so fun to just see their code switching like all the time and their associations. So
define code switching for our viewers, if you don't mind, because I know it's something we talk about in education all the time. And I was at book club a couple weeks ago talking about code switching, and the women said, I've never heard of that. What does that mean? So tell us, for you, what does it mean? Another term.
Yeah. So code switching for me means the ability to switch between languages. And so that's where code comes from. Code is identifying the language. And that can be a lot of things. It doesn't necessarily have to be oral. It's all kinds of different situations. And there's also that cultural component to it.
Well, and I want to add, like, code switching came about before I taught even native speakers. When I taught in high African American schools, it was sort of the code switch of like maybe home language as opposed to academic language, or some people talk about Ebonics, or it doesn't have to be where you have kids whose parents maybe swear a lot, and then they have to learn when they get to school that that's not how you speak to adults at school. It doesn't just have to be. There's code switching within the English language, how you talk at an interview as opposed to how you talk when you meet your friends at the bar. That's code switching. So it's not just for bilingual families, but it does come up a lot, because bilingual kids a lot of times are trying to figure out how to code switch in two different languages. And that can be a lot. That can be a brain overload. Yep.
Well, and that's why I was talking about how I'd love to see the brain of a child that does that at home, because their flexibility to switch back and forth is really incredible. But you make an excellent point with quote unquote English speakers in the United States, and it has to do with the culture that you're in and the situation that you enter, and your ability to adapt to that. And it really goes to talk a lot about the resiliency work, and what we understand about kids' resiliency and their ability to be resilient and adjust to situations. It's just another addition to help them to be able to identify that and to be more resilient.
Yeah. Oh, so nerdy. I love it. Thank you, Heather.
So that's the strategy. Some some positive things about using that strategy are that children get exposed to both languages, and both parents get to share their culture with them. In our last episode, Krista, you talked about how you wanted to share some cultural things with your daughters, and you use English at home, Spanish at home, so that becomes a little bit challenging. Parent one language, then both parents get to be share their language.
Well, yeah, and also just the bottom line, right? Going back to our mission is that any exposure to two languages is better than none. And so when both parents are speaking in their native language with that fluidity, with that confidence, with that understanding of all of the cultural and social and emotional implications that every word has. I mean, I'm a word nerd. I love language and words and how they work together and what they mean and different things. When you have each parent speaking just their absolute native language, it's really beautiful. It's really beautiful for the kid to grow up with that.
Yeah.
And then I guess I'm trying to think of another pro, and I'm looking at our nerdy article from the Linguistic Society. But I think those are the two. They're getting exposed from the womb, and then they're hearing like beautiful language from both parents. There are some negatives, and there's a couple that are myths that I want to talk about first, because we haven't actually touched on this yet, Heather, which is this whole kind of myth that if you're exposing your child to two languages in some way, shape, or form, either they're going to have a delay in speech, they're going to have social or emotional problems because they have two languages. I've also heard like they won't understand people in society. They'll mix up their languages, and this is a sign that they're not smart. None of those things are true. Can you talk a little bit about some of the kind of things that you see? Trying to think of how to say this. The cómo se retroceden, but it's not really retroceder. I know I shouldn't be using Spanish, but what's the word for that in English? Do you know where I'm going? Like when you're working with bilingual kids and it seems like maybe they're not up to grade level, but they're actually ahead because they know it in two languages. What does that look like? Why is it a myth that bilingual kids who mix up two languaes are not
advancing?
Actually, right. Yeah, exactly.
And they're actually delayed.
Yes. Delayed. Thank you.
Yep. So one of the major reasons that it looks like children are delayed is because of how we measure them, right? Because our society, and we've already talked about dominant culture and English being the dominant language, all of our measurements for, not all, but nearly all, most of our measurements and the ones that are valuable to people are measuring only the one language. And even if this EQUIS assessment is going to measure their Spanish, oftentimes that assessment is actually just an English assessment translated into Spanish. So again, and a really concrete example, and this is something that can have a whole show on when your kid goes to kindergarten. Dun, 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 dun. Because what happens is there's this very common assessment that's given, all the different assessments give it, but that the children need to be able to say their ABCs. Well, in Spanish, the ABCs are like, it doesn't matter, right? It's all about sonidos in Spanish. So to be able to say the letter names is a really plus assessment for a child's Spanish language. And what happens is that assessment is given in Spanish and in English. And so then children are measured as if they don't know things. And really all the things that children do know are not being measured. I did work with, I've worked with tons of amazing teachers, but the preschool teacher that I worked with in my last school was, she would take any color in any language and she count it as a point. and great for her and for recognizing that really they understand the color. It's not this, it's just the word that they need to learn. And that's really it. So our assumptions that children are delayed are really based on how we're measuring them. Measurements that we use are in so many ways, formal and informal, are deficit based. So they're not based on looking at children's assets and what they do have. They're looking at what they don't have. And that's because we're looking at them from it's called a monolingual paradigm. So a one language perspective. And that's what we're really looking at. So they're not delayed. They're just different. And it's going to be a long while, unfortunately, until we start valuing it more. Gratefully, dual language programming is going in more and more across the United States, and that is one, hopeful place for it.
Yeah. Oh, Heather, whenever you talk, I take notes. It's really nerdy, but there's all these terms like, I taught these things, but in a very, high school kids and in a very different way. And it just, I was all about what do they need and giving it to them. It wasn't I never did the research, and it's really, really exciting to hear all these terms. I want to go Google monolingual paradigm and deficit-based assessments. It's so nerdy and exciting. So thank you.
When I made the switch from, I taught 8th grade Spanish, year 1 Spanish. And when I made the switch, I actually started in bilingual, went to Spanish as a foreign language, and then went back to bilingual. But going back to bilingual was really an incredible, really get it, like, oh, that's what natural language is. All right. Do you have a child crying?
I do.
Okay. That's unfortunate.
But let's see here, because I'm going to give her just a couple minutes and turn on the fan in her room, which I can do from my iPhone.
Oh, that's amazing. I need you to teach me that trick, because I have been doing the fan every morning, getting up at 5 and sneaking in the room and turning it on.
Well, product placement number 2, I already showed you my Diet Dr. Pepper. I have a Nest, and so I just turn on the whole house fan, which is not energy efficient, but in a bind, it works, although it's having trouble updating right now. So,
okay.
And we're pretty close to our time. So
yep, we are. So I just wanted to say one other thing about children being confused and children mixing languages. That's the one I wanted to say something about, children mixing languages. Mixing languages previously 5 years ago was really looked at negatively, and we actually called it interference. It was called language interference. Today, researchers have found that actually it's not interference at all. It's an amazing transfer that's happening, and it's people's ability to be able to interchange languages. And so actually that shows a really it shows depth in a knowledge of a language, because there's only certain words you can put in a place and to replace them. So if someone's able to Spanglish, essentially, they really have a deep understanding of language and the structures of them. What they're just missing is the vocabulary, right?
Yeah.
So that's also something about the myth that I really wanted to address in terms of Spanglish and that sort of way. So it's just a vocabulary thing. So if you're concerned about your child that way, then work on some of that vocabulary that you've identified they're missing.
Which actually is happening with Eliana, because she got different vocabulary at school. I wrote a post about this, of her language, quote unquote, rebellion, but it was just that she got different language at school, and she loved her teacher who spoke English. So she wanted to be like her and say what she said. Right. But she just, she came home from St. Patrick's Day and she didn't know any of those words in Spanish, because we don't celebrate St. Patrick's Day in Spanish. So of course she didn't know those words. I never taught them. So that's that piece of, I'm already thinking of so many more episodes we could do, Heather, about, vocabulary acquisition and, preparing your child for kindergarten, and, how to prepare bilingual kids for the questions that their peers will ask them throughout their lives. And oh my goodness, so much stuff to talk about. So please do chime in on this discussion on using our hashtag bilingualwe. The other thing I want to self-plug here for just a minute, but I live in Denver, and there's a woman here who's created an app called Mama Lingua, and it's really set up for a couple different things, but I see it as a really great fix for one parent, one language households, because when children are emerging bilinguals, they generally tend to use the language of their primary caregiver that's doing their one parent, one language, right? So I'm home with the kids. Let's say I was speaking English. When Ricardo comes home from work, he does Spanish. they tend to emerge with whoever their primary caregiver is, because that's the language that they're hearing the highest frequency, right? And so Eileen, her husband doesn't speak a word of Spanish, and she only speaks Spanish to her kids. She's a stay-at-home mom. So she created this app where you can actually go into the app and you can pick a category of your day, like bedtime, ABCs, eating, grocery shopping, whatever it is. And if you're the parent who speaks English and you don't know what the Spanish-speaking parent is saying, or your kids are starting to speak Spanish to you and you don't know what they're saying, you can just push a button and it'll narrate for you in the opposite language. So the minority language, the one that you're not bilingual in, to be able to communicate with your kids. Or it's also great for grandparents. Like my kids would speak Spanish to my parents and they didn't know what they were saying. My mom downloaded the app and she's like, oh, I'm learning some basic child-rearing vocabulary. I love the app. It's not really set up, I don't think, for a household like mine, which is minority language, because we all speak the same language. We're all bilingual. But for the families who each parent speaks one language and they don't necessarily both speak that minority language, it's a great fix. And we're doing a giveaway on the site for the next 2 weeks.
Yay! That's so exciting.
I know. You can enter and download.
Get it.
Free. Yeah, it's $7.99 normally, but Eileen's going to give us 3 downloads. So you can just go over to Pura Vida Moms, and I'll link it to the show notes. I'll link the post, but I did an interview with Eileen, so you can kind of read more about the app, read more about her story, and just another bilingual parent creating something to make our bilingual community better and stronger. And then you can enter up to 1 time every single day if you want. And if you hashtag bilingual we, I'll give you 2 entries. So shameless plug for the blog, but please do visit us on that. And you can win a download.
Yeah, well, not shameless, because actually it's benefiting the winner, right? So 3 winners, which is amazing. So thanks for working with Eileen on that and sharing that resource with us. That's an amazing resource. The app, and you mentioned that if people hashtag bilingual we, they'll get another entry. We encourage you guys to use hashtag bilingual we for all sorts of things, to find articles. This week we shared an article on Facebook and on Twitter from For the Love of Spanish blog, and it was written by bringinguptheparks.com. And so about using multiple languages in their home, and parents who are not bilingual but multilingual. So and that's how we discover things, and that gives us a whole different way of thinking about them and a new perspective. So thank you for doing that. So let's wrap things up. We've got a couple articles that will go into the show notes. The one is about the myths, and that's actually an article that is from the Linguistic Society. It's a frequently asked questions about raising bilingual children. The article that was just tweeted yesterday by Krista about multilingual families, and I feel like there's one more. I'm missing one.
The article that was tweeted by our tweeter of the week.
The
Economist article. It's an older article, but it was really, really solid article about bilingual kids and how awesome they are.
Great. So, and again, you can find our community at puravidamoms.com, and you can also find us on most social medias if you just search the hashtag bilingual we. So we like to have a question for the week to kind of keep us all tied together, and that is, what bilingual strategy do you use at home and why? We have 3 more episodes in this series that we're going to talk about different raising our kids bilingual, and next week it's all about me, right?
Yes, finally, it's all about Heather. So situational bilingualism, and when you use a second language or a minority language depending on the situation. And this is so interesting. I'm super excited to talk to Heather more about it. So if you are a situational bilingual, tweet us, use our hashtag, tell us about that, what strategy you use at home, why do you use it, and you could get featured. We could mention you or tweet about you or share your information And you would be like, that would be your 5 minutes of fame really for the week. So you should definitely use our hashtag.
And also it'll just help me to not feel so lonely and lame, right? like right here.
Exactly, because I am not enough for Heather. She needs more friends. She needs lots more.
Yeah, I only got like 55 BFFs, so I like Jerry the trucking guy yesterday.
I just told my daughter, I always tell her that she's my best friend, and today I hung out with a childhood friend who ended up moving just a mile away, and her daughter and my youngest daughter are 2 weeks apart. So we're breastfeeding together. We're going through all our milestones. We can walk to each other's houses. And we have the exact same values because we grew up. I mean, we were like, we had the best friend necklaces. We had the fights. We had all of it from 4th grade on. Yeah. And so I kind of in passing said to my daughter, this was like before lunch and nap time. So I shouldn't have, I'm so thoughtless, you know, but I said, yeah, she's my best friend. And my daughter goes, but I thought I was your best friend. And I'm like, oh man, here all we go.
Off your nap.
So Heather can have 55 BFFs, but I only get to have 1, and she's 3.
Note to self: don't tell Thomas I'm his best friend.
Yeah, don't. It will end badly.
For my birthday, said, "Am I your 37th best friend?" Like literally wrote it in a card.
You're like, what do you mean? I'm still 25. I don't know what this magical number 37 is.
Right.
Well, we digress. Anyway, please do reach out to us. We love to hear from you. We love to engage in these nerdy articles. I'm going to start calling them nerdicles.
I love it.
And yeah, you can find all the links, all the giveaways, everything in our show notes. And thank you again for another awesome episode of Bilingual We, Heather.
Thank you, Krista. Look forward to next Tuesday again. What are we? 3 o'clock Central.
2 o'clock Mountain, 1 o'clock Pacific, 4 o'clock Eastern. I don't know what time in Hawaii or Spain, but yep, 3 o'clock Central Time. You can even access it live if you just look for us on our YouTube channel. And yeah, we'll see you then.
Great. Thanks.
All right. Thanks, Heather. Bye.